Thanks, Madam Chair. I have an amendment which I'd like to have circulated to the Department of Defense bill. Madam Chair, this amendment would ensure the Department of Defense funding is used for defense, not as a blank check for the Department of Homeland Security. A few years ago, with the passing of Senator Inouye, I found myself surprisingly in a position of chairing this subcommittee. It is an enormous responsibility. I salute Senator McConnell, Senator Coons, and one of the best appropriation staffs on the Hill for putting together this massive work. But what they've tried to do, and was explained by both the ranking member and the chair of the subcommittee, is to take limited resources and make sure they're spent well to keep America safe. What I'm addressing here is a practice which many members of the Senate may not be aware of. This amendment addresses the practice where the Department of Defense is called on to loan money to other departments, sometimes reimbursable, sometimes not. This bill would prohibit the Department of Defense from supporting DHS immigration enforcement on a non-reimbursable basis. In other words, if the Department of Homeland Security is going to spend the money for that purpose, let them do so. But if they're going to borrow it from the Department of Defense, pay it back. Immigration enforcement should be no different than other agencies. For example, when we have a natural disaster and the Stafford loan is activated, we have had instances in the past where the Department of Defense has provided the money to pay off for that natural disaster with the understanding they would be paid back, except in extraordinary circumstances. So it is done, but it's done on a reimbursable basis. So let's take a look at what's happened so far. So far this year, in the last few months, the Department of Homeland Security has borrowed $900 million from the Department of Defense not to be reimbursed. $900 million. The estimate is by the end of this year, it will be $2 billion. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. How are we going to house people who are being deported? You can house them through DHS facilities, or you can house them through the Department of Defense. The decision was made, let's do it at Guantanamo. How does that sound? Well, let's take a look at what that is costing as an example. For 180 individuals to be housed in Guantanamo for the Department of Homeland Security on a 3-month basis costs $40 million. How much is that per night? $72,000 a night for each one of the detainees because they chose to put them in Guantanamo in a DOD facility and incidentally not reimburse the Department of Defense for the expenditure to do this. What if they used the DHS facility to house these individuals? How much would that cost, Senator? Less than $3.2 million for the same group of 180 million. Instead of a $72,000 a night place for them to sleep in Guantanamo, it's merely $7,000 a night. The point I'm trying to make to you is this going to be an expensive undertaking, this notion of massive deportation. It's going to involve moving around a lot of money in a lot of ways. Reconciliation already addressed some part of this. All I'm saying is that if you're going to borrow the money from the Department of Defense to pay for this massive deportation, pay it back. This money has been appropriated for the defense of our nation. That's how it should be spent.